Reciprocity, foundation of human exchange. You're giving things to people and then you get things back from them. Give and take. Reciprocal. In some cases, these cultural meanings are going to be huge, like a birthday party or something like that, where people make a lot of meaning about it and expect something back. In other cases, it's just going to be the everyday life of being in a family or in a friendship relationship where you'll have this give and take. Your textbook tells you, that's where I crashed. Yes, your textbook tells you that it is food sharing which is most fundamental to how we live and survive, which is true. Humans are famous food sharers. It's very rare to find humans just going off and eating all by themselves. It's fine if you can't find friends, that's okay. But for the most part, we share food, we distribute it, we eat it together with others. It's in almost all societies and for all of human history, this has been one of the things that we do. Now, other primates do this as well. There's very famous episodes of chimpanzee and bonobo food sharing. And of course, you may have seen those bonobos when they come across a bunch of bananas or something. They get all tense about it and they diffuse that tension by having sex. But humans do, well, we do that too, but we do a lot of food sharing, and that's been our most important thing that we do to survive. Now, your textbook lists, and it's famous in anthropology, there are several forms of reciprocity and how people share gifts and food with each other. One of those is called generalized reciprocity, which just means that people are sharing things without an expectation that there will be direct payback. So you're just sharing more for you this time and you're not expecting to get anything back for it. Do we do any generalized reciprocity in our society? Christmas gifts. All right. Do you give Christmas gifts? Well, here's a good question for you. To what extent is that an example of what we might call balanced reciprocity? Now, it depends. Do you give gifts to people who don't give gifts back to you? Sometimes. So sometimes Christmas gifts, especially when you're a kid, you're getting the gifts. But as you get older, there's an expectation that you're going to be exchanging gifts and there's going to be a balance. I know, maybe you're not there yet. And you don't want to give something that's too big because then that person, who knows? So you don't want to give away something that's too big. But yes, Christmas gifts are an example of this. In most families, we practice generalized reciprocity. How many of your parents are charging you for rent or for your meals? In general, our families, and in some cases our friendships, are an example of generalized reciprocity. Balanced reciprocity is when there's supposed to be a payback. Now, in some cases, this may be very documented. You go somewhere, you give somebody something, and the expectation is that you're going to get something back later on. And in fact, it might even be an expectation in some societies that you're going to get a little bit more back later on. And it keeps going and you're building up over the cycle. Do we have any balanced reciprocity in our society? I mentioned gift giving in which people are exchanging things of a balance, but are there any other things where it's roughly balanced? Taking work shifts. Okay, good. Yeah, so you're not going to give up 8 hours of your day and be like, pay me back whenever. No, it's like we're going to swap this around and you're expecting the same or equivalent value. Your textbooks also gives you the example of barter. Work shifts might in some ways be an example. I'm going to give you this for that, and those are expected to be roughly equivalent. So yeah, swapping work shifts around. Let's see, balanced reciprocity. You do high school graduation parties where you come in and there's all these people and they have money gifts for you. Does this happen in your lives? You know about these? And then let's say somebody else has a graduation party and your parents go to that. What's the first question your parents ask as they're going to the party? Or what do you think about? You're going to your friends, you're going to your son's best friend party. I am. What do I want to remember about what happened when their parents came to my party? Yeah.
How much their parents gave to your kid?
How much did they give to us? Or how much did we give to that kid's brother? It's like setting up this exchange in which you want to know, hey, what ballpark am I going to be in? Because if they're giving you $100 and you're coming back with 20, that's no good. You need to establish a balance. You've just been shamed if you're only coming. So we have these kinds of expectations. Dinner parties, sometimes you're all supposed to swap around a gift or bring something to somebody's house, and you can't just be the only person throwing the dinner party. It has to rotate around, and you don't want to come to somebody's house with nothing. Oh, this is cultural capital. What do you come to somebody's house with when you're invited for a dinner party later on? When you need to have, yes, a bottle of wine, the classic gift. So you have to make sure you've brought a bottle of wine or flowers or something. You're supposed to show up at somebody's house with something. So there's an expectation of payback. Your textbook also mentions negative reciprocity, which is when somebody is getting more than they should be getting. I'm not sure if I like the idea of negative reciprocity. To me, it sounds just like stealing or exploitation. So I don't know why we necessarily use the word reciprocity. But there are some places in which the people who are in power expect gifts from their under people. And if that's just what's going on, the people are getting gifts, bribes, you might say, or a form of negative reciprocity. When you have to give something to somebody else, and in order to make the bureaucratic wheels spin, that might be an example of negative reciprocity. I prefer to think about reciprocity in a more positive sense, but that's been a traditional label of negative reciprocity. Another form of exchange your textbook refers to as redistribution. In redistribution, the stuff goes into a central place. Stuff, goods, money is collected in one place, and then it's distributed out from there in different ways. So you don't just get what you put in, you get something else. Do we have any redistribution in our society? When you collect things in a central place and then they get doled out differently than before. Spent differently, yeah. Your grocery store. Grocery stores are probably more an example of what we'll get to, which is a market exchange, where you're going and you're paying somebody for something. Let's see, does the grocery store do this? To a certain extent. Usually, it is a form of redistribution. It probably wouldn't be the classic form. Taxes are more of your classic form of redistribution in our society. You're supposed to pay taxes into a central government, and then that comes out in the form of roads and schools and the internet. Oh, wait, that doesn't work. But it comes out in forms of services to us, or the military and police. So it gets distributed out in new patterns. Taxes is a good example. You have to ponder the grocery store. The grocery store does work for this because people are putting stuff into a central place, and then in some ways it's being distributed out. A better example, your textbook uses like a food bank, in which people are contributing something, and then other people go in and they get other stuff. Grocery stores in our society usually operate under more of a market system, where if you don't have money, you're not getting any groceries. Whereas in a redistribution system, it's supposed to be based on your citizenship in a society or your membership in a group, rather than how much money you have. But yes, that brings us to our three modes of exchange. We have reciprocity, redistribution, and markets. Of course, in our society, we have determined that we do have reciprocity. We do have generalized reciprocity. There are cases in which people aren't calculating rent and food and charging you for it later on. And we do have redistribution to an extent in taxes, although taxes, at least in our society, are famously not very redistributive in terms of the wealth levels. That is to say, the rich people don't get poorer because they pay taxes. And market system, which is, well, let's talk about what markets are. Markets are any place where people meet to exchange goods, services, and money. So in our societies for food, we usually go to a grocery store, But some of you may have been to something like a farmer's market. And in other societies, these would be where you got your food. So you would have a bunch of farmers in a central place selling stuff, and you'd go along to their different stalls and you'd buy different things. Now, a grocery store is an extension of that, it's a bigger version of that. And if you go down to Hannaford, they will have some stuff from a farm there, and they'll say, oh, this is from a farm too. But in general, we have marketized, or we have made our food system much more capitalist than it might have been in the past. We are not the only society that has markets. In fact, markets have been in different societies all over the place. Your textbook gives you the example of Aztec markets. So this was pre-Hispanic in what is now Mexico. We talked about the people who marched through Teotihuacan and set up Tenochtitlan, and they had different forms of currency or different forms of money. So for example, in Aztec markets, and by the way, that's where we get cacao and chocolate and all those wonderful things, is because the people in the Mexico Valley domesticated them for us. So they used cacao beans and also some cotton textiles as currency. What's interesting in reading through this about the cacao beans is that even something like cacao beans, people would try to counterfeit them. They'd make little clay objects and try to make them seem or pass them off as cacao beans. So it's an interesting case, because you'd think you can't count. People try to counterfeit money all the time. You'd think you couldn't counterfeit something like this, but in fact people were actually trying to do this, or at least that's what the archaeologists tell us. So we have reciprocity, that give and take. We have redistribution. And in many societies, we also have what are called markets, and we're quite familiar with markets from our own society. Now, your textbook mentions that we, of course, live in a capitalist society, and as I've been saying, grocery stores, for example, are usually an example of how our food distribution is controlled by corporations or people that are trying to make a profit from it. Now, capitalism is a tricky thing, there's a lot of people that believe that capitalism is just trying to get rich in a marketplace. And that's not actually what capitalism is. So people all over the world have tried to get rich and tried to sell things low and buy low and sell high, or get a lot of money. But that capitalism is a very specific form of production in which certain people, private ownership of the ways in which we get our stuff. So it's not simply just making money or greed. It's if you have ownership of the means of production. And some people have argued that in order to actually be a capitalist, you can't be that greedy, because what you're supposed to do is take that money that you're making and put it back into the business and make more stuff. Eventually, you're trying to make lots of money, of course, but it's through reinvesting in your business. So it's not simply that you're going off and taking all your money and living in a castle somewhere, or giving it to the church, which is what people used to do in the pre-capitalist days. If you made money, you either had to give it back to your community because people would take it out of you, or you just tried to go off and live your life. In capitalism, you're supposed to take that money and put it back and continue to make more grocery stores and spread out, have Hannafords all over the place. But those grocery stores are private, and they are owning the means of production, and they're putting people to work in a private way.